Hello and welcome to Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things, the podcast show. I am your host, Carrie Roberts, and we are doing another segment of our Connected Conversations with Relationships where I bring on a couple who's been together for a while and we talk about how they met and their story. And this is the third in our series, and I am so excited to welcome Scott and Susan Westwater. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes. So we've met many times before, and I was so excited when you were like, we will be on this show. So I want to start, I've been starting with all of these couples about each of you individually. And Susan, I'll start with you. When you were younger, and I'm saying younger, maybe like middle school, high school, what was your kind of thought on relationships, on dating? Like, what were you told by your parents, by society? What was kind of your idea as a young girl?
Oh my gosh, that's a loaded question. I come from a not non-traditional, but full disclosure, my grandmother who got married in the 20s was 25, 26 when she got married, which was considered by then like spinster, I believe was the word they still use. So like in middle school, it's really funny. I have a sister who's 10 years older than me. And she definitely went down the relationship of like the whole path of like dating guys. And it was really cool. And I always was like, that's really neat. That also was when I was getting into equestrianism and I was riding and I was training. So I didn't have time for that, quite honestly, especially in high school. I was spending most of my summers with, if there was a guy who I thought was cool, I only saw him 3 months of the year on the show circuit. And then it was like, see you in a year or whatever. So like, it was a very different thing. Like in my mind, it never was like a priority, I guess, because in my family, like, and this again sounds really strange, but it was like, it's a bigger compliment to be called smart than pretty. Not that you can't be both, but it was very much that type of an attitude. So it was also then we didn't have a lot of that, oh, and someday you're going to get married and go on. Like I remember thinking once when I was like 16 and my mom said something to me about as we were driving up to the barn and I was getting ready to do some schooling sessions. And she's like, well, and someday, you know, like when you get married, you can do this with your husband. And I like looked at her, I'm like, so you think that's going to happen automatically? Really? Huh? So I think that kind of skewed in this sort of a sense of, it wasn't, I thought it was a bad thing. It was just one of those things where I'm like, there's a lot of stuff I want to do. And I certainly didn't think with the way that my dad worked in radio broadcasting. And my mom was a critical care nurse. So their jobs meant that they weren't always together all the time. And so they had very independent lives. So I also didn't think like, oh, your life ends when you get married. It was just definitely one of those things where it's like, if it happens, it's amazing if you wait for the right person. But if not, that's cool too. Like it was very much that kind of an attitude towards it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. It's interesting to hear different women's opinions and then of course the men too, because Scott, is this something like you even thought of like when you were a young guy or you were like, whatever?
I was sitting here for the past couple minutes listening to her answer going, what the hell am I about to say? Because like, I got nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at least for me, it wasn't something that you really thought about very much. I played football in high school and so I was really involved with that. And didn't really date all that much in high school and certainly not in middle school or anything like that. So, but yeah, for me, it was really never like a thing I gave a lot of thought to, thinking someday I'd meet the right person and get married or whatever, but it was not something that was kind of top of mind by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. So, it's always interesting to me to talk about that because I think who we are as people when we're younger and our parents, our society shapes a lot of how we think about relationships. So now I'd love to, the main part of these conversations is how you met. And Scott, I'm going to start with you kind of telling the story of how you met, kind of set the scene here. And we're just going to put you on a spotlight here with both of you and just kind of share with us, how old were you? Where were you? And tell the story, and Susan can chime in how she wants as well.
That's really funny.
God, how old was I? I was in my 30s. I think I was like 29, yeah, 28, something like 30. That. It was a couple years ago. I'll give you a but so we actually met on Match.com back before people were really doing this online dating thing, back when it was still taboo and, most people weren't really doing that. At the time, I was working in advertising in Chicago, and I was probably averaging 80 to 100 hours of work a week or whatever. And so I was really kind of married to my job at that point. And so for me, outside of occasionally hanging out with my friends, match was really the only way that I saw that I could actually meet someone, and it actually ended up working out. She'll tell the story, which is actually pretty funny. But for me, I think it was like my last month of the subscription. I think I did it for 6 months or something like that. And it wasn't really, finding anything interesting. And it felt kind of like a waste of time. And it was one of those things where I'm like, all right, I'll just give it another month, see what happens. And well, this happened. So, but yeah, but she actually has a very funny version of the story because I'll just let her tell it.
Okay. So, so how I ended up on Match, because I feel like that's an interesting thing. So I was living downtown in an incredible studio apartment at the corner of Michigan and Walton. I was on, it 2 different hockey teams when we first met? And I was also playing flag football on Saturdays, even on a team that played outdoors in January in Chicago. I don't really know what was wrong with me, but I was definitely looking to meet somebody, but I also was looking around all of my athletic fun friends and being like, oh my God, this dating pool needs a lot of chlorine. Like, I love all of you guys like brothers. I will never meet someone who I like. No way, not going to happen. I've been on how many teams now, and they, great guys, awesome. All of them are wonderful. I would write letters of recommendation for someone else. And so then I started going, like, I tried Match, and was it the first 2 were like, these are people who would be like great. And when I met them, they seemed like they wanted to vicariously live through my exciting life. Because at that point I was traveling because I was still horseback riding and competing. I was working on these sports teams. I was an extrovert. I was working at a really big promotional marketing advertising agency. So I was getting to do really fun, amazing things. And a lot of these guys, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to suck the life out of me. Like, this isn't a compliment. And so I was getting kind of depressed, quite honestly, because I was sort of like, all right, I'm not going to do this anymore because these guys are all like really boring and this is not moving on. And so then there was this one day where you could do like, I don't know, like it's still on Match this way, but you can like wink at someone and be like, I think you're interesting, but you don't have to put that much effort forth to like see if they like you back. If they wink back, then you can actually go through writing a letter. And at that point, that was how MVP I was at that point, where I was just like, all right. And there's this goofy guy who's sitting there with like both thumbs up, like that is the exact pick. And I'm like, you know what? Even if we don't work out, that's someone I want to hang out with. That guy looks like he's having a really good time. So I wink at him. He does not respond for, I would say, I have no idea how long it was, because it was not when we got instant gratification. This was like the days of dial-up and you'd have to go in and look. So it probably was like 4 or 5 days. I don't know. It seemed really long. And I'm like, well, that's like, then I was offended. I was sort of like, the guy's not winked back. Well, screw that guy. I'm cool. Whatever. So I was getting more and more just kind of pissed off. And I was just like, I'm cooler than that. I'm at least worth a wink. And what it turns out, and I'll actually let you defend yourself on this.
In my defense, I was in Las Vegas with my friends and my brother for his 21st birthday. And it was before you had smartphones. You had no way of actually getting any sort of email or anything like that. So I had no idea she had sent me a wink or anything like that. And it wasn't until I got home, and I think it was probably like 4 or 5 days after she had done it, I'd responded. And she actually told me that she thought I was blowing her off. And so that's kind of how it all started, which is actually pretty funny when you think about it.
Yeah, it was really...
I love that. It's so funny because isn't it interesting? I'm sure both sides do this, but is the female, you're like, oh, he's not responding to me, whatever.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And then he's like, I didn't even see it. Like, I wasn't even...
Well, and again, it was like you had to have your own home computer. Mm-hmm. And so like it wasn't until I got back in Chicago and probably the next day where I was checking my email that I even saw any of this stuff. So when you think about it from a historical context, it makes total sense. Yeah. But like in 2020 terms, that's ridiculous. You took 5 days to get back to someone. Come on.
But so what did you respond back, Scott?
Oh God, I can't even remember. It was...
You didn't have some witty thing to say back?
It was probably some apology about being out of town. I think I was probably just very honest about it.
I think so. Yeah, I think you were. And then I think you painted yourself to be this rollerblading, wholesome guy who lived with his brother. And I was like, how bad can this guy be? I mean, he sounds so wholesome. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder if he's going to want to deal with me. So that was kind of like, that was the funny thing about all of that.
And so where did you go on your first date?
We went to a restaurant that's no longer around, but there was a sushi restaurant in Chicago that we used to go, and we got to know the owner really well. And it was actually when he was working for someone else. And so I can't remember the name of it. Hamamatsu. Up on the north side. And so that's where we had our first date. I had been there with friends a couple times and knew the chef a little bit. So it was one of those, we'll just sit at the bar and, we'll order, whatever he wants to make and do kind of the cool guy thing. But I think at that point, I wasn't really even super well versed in sushi. So he was really just bailing my ass out, which, of course, made me look better than I probably should have been, because otherwise I would have been fumbling through the menu. So,
yeah.
So when you got there, what was your first, Scott, what was your first impression when you saw Susan? Because when you are talking online, it's a little different, but when you see someone in person and their energy, what was your first impression of her?
Well, I don't really remember a ton from that night, in all honesty, but I do remember when she walked in, I just went, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And that was kind of like my first, like, I vividly remember that.
Why?
Just because there was a radiance about her, and I just remember her walking in the room and just kind of having that thought go through my head. Because I think at that point we had probably talked for a month-ish, because like she was doing a lot of travel for work, and then she was also doing the horses.
Yep.
So it wasn't it wasn't like an immediate like meeting up kind of a situation. There was probably a good month and a half before we actually got together that first time.
Difficult, apparently.
So what was your first impression, Susan, of him when you finally saw him?
Well, the one thing that's really funny is I was actually a little late because I was taking the red line and I did not plan well. I should have taken a cab, but at that point Scott will tell you, I can take public transportation. I'll do that. So, of course there was a delay. And so I was a little bit late. So he was sitting, and I remember walking in being like, oh, there you are. Like, I didn't have to look around and be like, which guy is it? Like, I knew immediately who you were. And I remember being like, oh, wow. And that was kind of like, there you are. All right. Like, there's my person. Like, it was really one of those things where, and then I think all my nervousness went away too, or at least I pretended it did.
So as you're kind of, having this first date, did you feel like, wow, this person, what was your feeling? Did you feel comfortable? Did you feel an immediate connection? Because again, you've been talking for a month, but now you're in person. So it's obviously different.
Yeah, I would say definitely there was a connection, because I had been at that point, because I'm an optimist and a glutton for punishment, I'd been on enough of these failed year to launch things where you're like, how do I get out of this delicately? Like, what's my exit? Like, I went into many, and this sounds horrible, but I had a lot of exit strategy plans. Because you within the first 2 seconds of talking to each other, you're like, oh, wow. So that what seemed really articulate email, and like, if anyone knows me, I'm a double English major, so it's really hard for me to turn off, being able to articulate yourself and be a good conversationalist. Finding out that person didn't just write that, but that they took hours to edit it. So then in talking with me, I'm like, I feel like this chatterbox of just over the headness that did not happen with you at all. Like, it was very comfortable, and it was just one of those things where I'm like, this is great. This is awesome. I mean, as a matter of fact, I full disclosure, we then went to the beer hall across the street after the said first dinner, which was one of those things where it was like, all right, this is going to be too long. There was a very long, because we just were enjoying each other's company so much that we just kept hanging out. We're like, oh, let's still hang out. So yeah.
I love that. So you start dating. At what point did you both say, I love you to one another? Who said it first? And was it a big deal to either of you?
Well, the funny thing that happens after this said first date is I end up I had gone for a job interview. I think our first date was on a Tuesday. That Monday, I came back from the job interview. It was in Ohio. It was in Cleveland. And I was just I had hit a moment where I'm like, I need to change a life. Maybe this is a few things I'm not pleased with in my career. I want to do this. And I got the job on Wednesday. So after I go out on this first date with this guy, and we had made plans to go out on Thursday, because it was like, that's the real date night. This was, we're talking about isochart. It was like, let's go out on a Tuesday so I can, if I have to, say I've got big meetings for the rest of the week. Like, it was totally.
I'm super busy later in the week.
No, it was so bad. It was so bad. And so what ended up happening was I get this job offer. So I call him and I'm like, so yeah, I'm moving to Cleveland in like 2 weeks. Do you still even want to go out? And you were like, well, it's only 5 hours. And there was a weird part of me at that moment. If he had said, well, job or me, not that anyone would ever say on the second date, that I was like, well, would I consider that? And I'm like, well, maybe. And I'm like, and in my head, I'm like, you crazy fool. No girl does that, or girls do that. And then they are really unhappy later and they make movies and they end up on the Hallmark Channel. So no. So at that moment I decided, I'm like, but he was like, hey, you live in Cleveland, not that far. So, it ended up being that I moved to Cleveland 2 weeks later. So that was April. In October, I moved back. 6 months later, I found a new job and just moved back. Because I realized I was spending all of my time in Chicago still, and that really wasn't working out. So, and there was no way this guy was moving to Cleveland.
You didn't want to move to Cleveland, but you were like, okay, it's a 5-hour drive. Like, we'll make it work. Yeah. You were so confident of that after the first date, Scott?
Yeah. And you didn't even have a car. I know.
No.
You did not.
No.
What did you do? You just walked?
Totally. I walked really, really fast.
Wait a minute. That was really confident.
No, I think I ended up flying most of the time, quite honestly. There was one situation where she ended up having a migraine, so I ended up driving her back unexpected on like a Sunday evening. And then I flew back one way like on Monday or something like that. But that was back in the days where Scott was footloose and fancy free, and I was a freelancer, and I was making my own schedule. So I was like, I don't have to go to like the office on Monday. So, but yeah, I think that was probably one of the only times, if not the only time, that I actually drove either to or from Cleveland. So
yeah,
that's so adorable. All right, so back to my original question.
I don't even know. Was
there a moment that either of you were like, I love this person? Who said it first? Do you remember any of that?
I said it first.
You did?
And it was in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't tell you when.
I think there was alcohol involved.
Could have been 2 weeks in. Could have been a month in.
Could have
been 3 months. I don't remember like the actual time.
Yeah, you remember better than I do. So yeah. No, that's.
So it wasn't something, Scott, that you were like holding this in for a while. It was just kind of it blurted out, and it just felt like just natural to say that.
Yeah. It wasn't. I don't know. It wasn't like where people make a big to do out of it, and it was like bubbling up inside of me, and like like I was so nervous and things like. It wasn't anything like that. It was just like I think if nothing else, it was like just a natural expression, and it felt like right, and so it came out, and that was kind of that.
I would say that like being in our late 20s, there was no games. Like, it was like, I like you, you like me, now what? Like, it was very much like that was constantly what we were doing. Like, that's how it was, just that comfort level versus I had been in relationships prior to that where you're like, how many days till I call? All that stuff. I'm like, no, you know what? I'm calling him because I feel like calling him. Screw it. I'm doing this. Like this. I'm not going to pretend to be anyone but me, because at this point, this is going to stay that way. So, yeah.
I love that. So you're now back in Chicago, and you date for a while. How long were you dating before you decided to get engaged, to get married?
Let me think about this. So that was 2004.
Year and a half.
It was about it was about a year and a half, because that was when we ended up moving in together for a short period of time. Which is like a whole other.
And anytime I would see her grandmother, I would always go, "Hi, Nana," and she would go, "Hi, Scott. It's great to see you. I don't approve of how you're living with my granddaughter."
Yeah,
so I was referred to as Scott. I don't appreciate how you're living with my granddaughter, kind of a thing. So that was like my full name. And you know, that kind of lasted for a little bit, but we got engaged in Mexico that following Christmas Eve.
Yeah. Well, on horseback at sunset on the beach.
And Scott, you planned that?
I did, except I planned it very poorly. So in my haste to get everything, like, because we were going down with my family and stuff like that, and everyone was at my place before the cab got there. In my haste to get everyone out the door and get all the bags out the door, I actually forgot my jeans, full on knowing that I had to have a pair of jeans in order to ride horseback.
No.
And I don't realize this until we get down to Mexico. And so that caused all kinds of problems because she thought that it meant that I didn't want to go on horseback, not knowing that I had a ring and this whole plan.
Oh my gosh.
My whole family was in on it.
There was a fight. There was an ugly ass fight before because I had told him, like, when we were going, there is only one thing I want to do. I have been to the Caribbean umpteen times. I've never gotten to ride on horseback for reasons or other. So I had gone to all this effort of researching like an ethical, well-reputed trail riding place. And then he's like, I don't have my jeans. And I'm like, I basically was like,
I might as well have said, I hate you. At that point.
I lost my mind. And was it your brothers were like, you need to talk her up. They were like, how do we talk her off the ledge? Because all of them were frightened of me at that moment, except Scott, who was just like, I want it. I think you said, I wanted to like bean the ring off your head at that moment. Like he was like, and of course, I don't know any of this. And I'm just like, forget it. I'm just going to go by myself. Screw this. I'm like, that's totally how life is. And that was exactly like. So
the best thing is I ended up wearing my brother's jeans, which were probably 3 sizes too small for me.
Yeah, they were so scared. They're like, take our clothes.
And I actually had the ring in my pocket. And so
I didn't even notice it. Like that was
after all was said and done, I actually ended up with a bruise on my pocket because the jeans were so tight. It was actually digging into my leg for 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
But that's not, Carrie, that's not even the best part of the whole story. So we get engaged, and so we're on a trail ride with the group, and it was up through the canyon at first, and then we broke off with the guide, and everyone else went back, and we did sunset, and it was beautiful, and blah, blah, blah. Well, what we had failed to realize is we were in Mexico, and it was December, so it was getting dark soon, early.
And this was
like we didn't have international cell phones. There was no smartphones. Yeah. Uber didn't exist.
Yeah.
And so like we had taken a taxi out there. It was like a 40-minute drive. And so when we get back to the ranch, we're like, oh, how do we get a cab? And the guy's like, well, you don't get a cab out here. You take the bus. And we're like, okay, cool. No big deal.
Right.
So
I know enough Spanish.
We get on the bus. We pay our 10 pesos or whatever it was. And we explain to the person where we needed to get off. And of course, I don't speak Spanish. He doesn't really speak English. So we had a bit of a failure to communicate. And we ended up about a mile past where we were supposed to get off. So we're like, Alto, stop. And he goes, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. So we get off. And we were walking along a road that was like a major highway. And we were like on the dirt sidewalk at that point. And so we're walking back. We're about a mile from the entrance to this place. And there's a fence along the one side. And there's a point to the story, believe me. So we're walking along, and I see that there's actually a hole that's cut out. And she's on my left. And I go, watch out for that. And she disappears.
Yep.
And she falls down on top of a drainage pipe,
Thank
like
goodness.
7 feet. And had she not landed on that, she probably would have fallen like 15 feet.
I had enough time to be in free fall to like have a couple of minutes to be like, this is really gonna hurt when I land. But
like an idiot, I jump in. She goes, "What are you doing down here?" And so like I helped her out of the hole. I got out of the hole. We still have like a 3/4 mile walk to get back.
Yeah.
And so we get back to the resort, and there's like a little guard station up front, and they're like, "What the hell happened to you?" And we're like,
but they didn't ever offer to be like, hey, get on our golf cart.
Right.
I didn't look wounded enough.
Right.
Because I had gone down a whole cactus. Like, and then luckily I was wearing jeans from riding because it was the concrete top. So like my legs, luckily as a professional clumsy faller person, I landed semi on my feet. But I had like basically cactus spines all the way up my arm, down my back, and until where like the jeans were. It was ridiculous.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah.
And the best part was we were meeting my family at a restaurant for dinner. And so we had expected to be there practically by the time we got back to the room. And it took us 2.5 extra hours to get there. Again, no cell phones, no way to communicate to them. So we finally show up at the restaurant. They're like, where the hell have you guys been?
They were like, oh my God, she said no.
And I'm like, do I have a story for you? And I tell them. And no sooner did I finish the story, my brother goes, but she's okay, right? And I went, yeah. He goes, so we can make fun of her now? And that's how my family reacted when we got engaged. So
yeah, it was.
But you had asked her before this whole incident, or once you got up?
Yeah,
to
and
the
you
restaurant?
actually said like you could have just said no. You didn't have to try to kill yourself.
right.
Like, yeah, it was pretty
so
funny.
I had asked her before all of this craziness had transpired, but literally it was like 45 minutes after we got engaged, she threw herself down a hole and tried to kill herself.
Yeah.
So
But he came after you.
He did, and then I was just like, what is
this was
wrong
the
with
right
you?
decision, right?
right.
Yeah,
right.
yeah, no, he did. And then he was like, and he was also really good because he's like putting his hands over me, and later, and I was like, oh, it's so sweet. He was checking to make sure I'm okay. He was making sure there were no spiders, because like if there was a spider, you would have flung yourself all the way down to the bottom of the ravine. And I'm like, oh, I would have absolutely at that point.
Yep.
So yeah. So yeah.
I love that. That is. I
So,
mean,
yeah.
it kind of follows the trajectory of what we've talked about so far. A little craziness, a little bit upset, and you're there for each other.
Never a dull moment.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that. So, how old were you when you got married?
You must have been 30, and I think I was 31.
Something like that.
I think that sounds right.
Mm-hmm. And you have a son now too, right? How old is he?
We do.
He's 7.
7.
He decided to come in during our interview.
Yeah, if
here,
you saw me looking down.
So
Yeah, despite
despite being professional like interviewees here,
Yeah.
and knowing the rules,
That's
apparently,
okay. No worries. So, again, I know we're kind of doing an overview of so many years. I think one of the things that's interesting is there's different parts of relationships. It's, when you're courting each other, and then you're dating, you're engaged, you're married, and then you have children. I do not have children myself, but how would you say having a child changed your relationship, for better or worse, or how you had to communicate, or how did it differ once you had a family?
Do you want me to go first? Because you have that look.
Sure. I've got a smart ass answer. So.
I know you do. Well, then, okay, you go be smart ass, and then I'll provide the advice I give other couples.
Every day is worse than the next.
Nice. No. I think if anything, we've been pretty simpatico most of our relationships. You can hear, even though we always have peril and silliness. I think one of the things, though, that you find out is no matter how similar you think you are, when you have a child and you start raising a child together, you find out every single difference. And it's not bad, but it's sort of like, well, we were allowed to do that. Oh, no, we weren't allowed to do that. Or, wow, you go to DEFCON 5 a lot faster. Or like in my household, we never would have been allowed, and it's been figuring that out. I think the first few years, it was definitely something to figure out and negotiate. And I think now it's definitely something where we've come up with our own style that works.
Well, that, and it's the good cop, bad cop, and then role reversal of the good cop, bad cop.
Occasionally, yeah.
So especially now that he's a little bit older and getting into everything. So
got to switch it up on them, right?
Yeah. I mean,
absolutely.
she can't constantly be the bad person, and I can't be the good guy all the time, and vice versa. So
That always seems to be the case. It usually seems to be the mom that's the bad cop in many cases for some odd reason. But so you also own a business and work together, which is a whole nother level. We had another couple that did that and kind of talked about that. What has that process been like for the two of you? And before you kind of work separate jobs, and now you not only are working together, but you're doing it in a way where you've created it yourself. You've written a book together. You've done a lot of this. What has that been like?
honestly, like every time I tell someone that I work with my spouse, they're like, how do you do it? I could never do that. Like, you're nuts. it works. Like it's easy. And I think, in a lot of ways we complement each other, both personally and professionally. And certainly from a practical skill set standpoint, she and I have very complementary skill sets. So that's how we're able to write a book, and it was all self-published. Like I did all the design, she did a lot of the writing, we did a lot of the editorial, and so combined we had all the skills to get it done.
Yep.
So like we find ourselves in those situations a lot due to what I did in my career and what she did in her career previously.
Yeah, and I would say too, some of the things that it's brought us closer together in some regards, and I think in other regards, it's definitely highlighted at moments parts of our relationship. He's like, it's easy. There's work. I'm not gonna lie. There are moments where I've had to learn how to change my communication style so that that you understand everything, and it's not just it's just a work thing. Like we're building a business together. Like we have to be on the same page at all times. And if one of us is resenting the other because it's like, well, I don't think you're pulling your weight, even though we are, it's sort of like, got to talk about it. Or if there is I thought you were doing that, I thought you were, or stepping over each other, you have to have those conversations. So if you aren't on the same page, those are difficult, ugly conversations. And that's where I think people can say that there's no way I could do that. But if you accept, like, there's going to be a minute I'm going to have to say something uncomfortable or address my weakness, because it's like, well, you suck at always following through, but I've got someone who always keeps me on target. That's really helpful. And being able to say to myself and be acknowledging of, hey, you know what? I'm not always awesome at following through every little thing, or sometimes I either do all of the things or only just a couple things. And he's the one who helps me, is like, I'm going to make sure that we're getting through this thing. Because we wrote our book in 6 weeks. And I remember looking at him being like, are you insane? There's no way we're going to do this. And we did it. Yep. And he was like, we're going to put out a deadline, because I know if I give you a deadline, you'll make it happen. But if I don't give you a deadline, it's never happening. And so like, those are the things like where you have to sit there and acknowledge that about yourself. But if I didn't, we wouldn't have a book.
Right. And on the plus side, I've been Employee of the Month 5 times. Yeah. But she's also put me on a employee performance
he's been on
thing
a couple times.
2 or 3 times. So I kind of have both ends of the spectrum. So.
Yeah, I love it. It's so good. How do you, again, I think it's very common. Communication is something we always are continuing to work on. Nobody's ever a master of it. It's hard enough with family and work, but then with your spouse, it's got to be a whole nother level. How do the two of you, especially over time, like you said, now you have a business, you have a child, we change as people. How do you kind of communicate with each other if maybe you are feeling off? You're like, okay, we're just arguing today, it's just not working. What are the things that you do that you find is helpful?
Sarcasm. Lots and lots of sarcasm.
Yeah, that's true.
No, I think it's, taking a moment, taking a breath, and kind of collecting yourself, especially if you are having an off day, before launching into whatever. So there's bigger repercussions when like everything is kind of intertwined versus if it's just the office and people accept that, you separate the office and home kind of a thing. But when you're working with your spouse or family for that matter, like you kind of have to be a little bit more mindful, because having a bad day at the office also turns into a bad day at home and a bad day just kind of in general. And then you layer on top of it the complexities of what's going on with COVID and now needing to remote school. And so our son is her office mate.
Yeah.
And so I'll oftentimes hear her trying to get him to do his stuff. And he's 7. Like, I get it. I was that same kid when I was 7 years old. I didn't want to do any of it. Yeah. It was, to me, it was dumb. And so like, I'll find myself occasionally going down there and go, hey, I will help you out right now because I like our kid and I want him to stay around. And so like, I also don't want you to go to prison. So like,
we're not that bad.
No, but it's just one of those things where I recognize when you need to have a break and it's time for you to like just kind of go and do whatever you need to do. Especially when it's things that I can handle, like this new math. Forget it. I got no idea what the hell they're talking
I have
about.
not met a parent yet that likes it. I think everyone says it makes no sense.
How do they change math? It's math for crying out loud.
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of get it, but and that's where he's like, I don't remember. I'm like, I get it. I don't know if it's really better, but whatever, how that is. And he'll usually come down when he hears like our son will be like, why do you always have to take it so far? Why? Why? And like, he'll hear the start and he's like, oh my gosh, he's talking back and it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
But like at 7, but, cause somehow he's sarcastic and
I don't know where it comes
from. But yeah, definitely. I think that's it. And I will say too, we don't let stuff, we address it right there.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't let something fester. So if there is something that happens, it's like, we will say, I think sometimes like your phrase is, by the way, and then I know it's coming, which is kind of funny. I don't know if you knew that was that's your
That's
kid. It is your tell.
I'll have to switch it up.
If you ever noticed that, I suddenly I'm like, all right, wait for it. No, but it's good. But at that moment, it'll be, by the way, when you do this with the driver, like you talk about the things that annoy you right there and don't just let them all add up and be like, and another thing. Mm-hmm. So we just constantly have that. So it doesn't become a big giant thing. And that's an important thing because that way then or else it'll be, I want to check in with you. And so we don't let it fester, especially like if it's after calls or something, it's one of those things so that you aren't like, I've got to hold this together until we're out of this call because we keep communicating about it. There's never this, I'm getting ready to have this big meeting, which is kind of nice. With employees, you kind of have to, in my professional corporate world, you had to kind of let things add up a little before you could be like, hey, this needs to be addressed. But like when it's your spouse, you're like, hey, this is a personal thing. So I can kind of talk about my personal preference, which is kind of helpful.
And I'm putting you on a PIP.
I know. Whatever.
Well, I think it is good that, again, you've kind of found a communication style that works for the two of you. I think one of the things that's important is that there is no perfect relationship and everybody's is different. Everybody's got a different dynamic with their spouse and what works for them, of course. Right. What would you say is, Susan, I'll start with you. What is something that Scott has done recently for you that you really appreciated or really showed that he loved and cared for you?
God, I don't know. There hasn't been that. No, I'm kidding. Actually, his point about with homeschooling and coming down, like there was a night, gosh, I think it was just earlier this week where I was just hitting a wall because, let's see, we had Voice Summit. I'm presenting, I have another conference and I'm presenting another talk on Monday. We had some Voice Masters things. And then we also had stuff for the OBN. And I was just kind of sitting there going, okay, I've done it. Stop me before I do anything else. And I was hitting my moment and he picked up immediately on that and was sort of like, I'm giving you the night off. I'm going to figure out new math. And he just took on homework and took on like some of that stuff just to give me the space that gave me permission to be like, no, you're not a sucky mom. No, you're not a sucky. You have to do everything. Because I do think that is something that women do get ingrained with right now of the whole, I need to have the house all spotless. I need to have all this. It's all that and then. And he's always been really good about being like, I don't care. And it's not, I don't care because it's not important. It's just, that's not where your value lies. So if our house is perfectly decorated, not that big of a deal.
I mean, I'll jokingly say it's going on the Yelp review or we're going to bring this up, your, 6-month review.
Yeah.
But it's not that I don't care. It's that in the grand scheme of things with everything going on, like there's levels of importance, and that's a lot of that stuff, in my opinion, is kind of on the lower side of things. So it's not worth stressing out over. And like, why work all day, do homework, and then like do housework until 10 or 11 o'clock at night? Like it just doesn't make sense. There's always tomorrow. There's always other time we can do it. Quite frankly, part of the reason why we started our own company is so we could, if we need to do something on a Monday morning, great. Mm-hmm. If we need to do something on a Saturday, like awesome, whatever. Like it's actually helped us decompartmentalize our lives. And it's just kind of like all one big chunk as opposed to like, well, here's the work time, here's the home time, here's the personal time. Like it's all kind of all intermeshed. And I actually, quite frankly, like it a lot better.
Yeah. We don't live for the weekend as hard. Our son does because that's days he doesn't have school. But so I kind of live for that now a little bit. But reality is like I can give myself a break today because I'll just pick that up on Saturday. And that's an okay trade-off for me. Mm-hmm. Like I don't have to feel like I had the whole day off and then like it's fine. Like if I can take an afternoon, it's great.
Yeah, no, I love hearing that. I think, support is a huge part of a healthy relationship. So, Scott, what about you? What is something that Susan has done for you recently that has showed appreciation or love or support or respect or something you really appreciated recently?
I mean, I joked about it, but like the employee of the month thing, like there's usually either a bourbon or a scotch associated with that. And that's just kind of a nice surprise and delight thing, even though it's kind of in jest.
Yeah.
It's still really, really nice. And I really appreciate getting like, not recognition, but like, just that she was thinking of me and that here's something I know you enjoy. So here is a token of my appreciation, affection, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the dog did win it a couple times.
That's true. He did. That's when I was on the pit. The dog won the employee of the month. So.
Oh, I love it. I just love the humor and there's a lightness, I think, about both of you that works well, and I obviously we've met before and we've interacted, and I love the two of you together. Do you have any advice for people that are in the dating stage and they're like, I'm just not finding the right person, or like, what should I be looking for? Now that you have found your person, what would you say are things that people should be looking for? So it is a healthy relationship and the potential for the right person for them.
Yeah. I hate this to be a Hallmark moment, but it's one of those things where like, if you haven't found the right person yet, don't give up. Like as cliched, as bullshitty as that is, it's actually very true. Like we both met very late in life comparatively. Yeah. Now like now in the big city, it's like whatever, no big deal. But even when we had met, that was still kind of a little bit later, comparatively speaking. So I think that's a huge thing. Don't give up. Just continue to look for that right person and don't settle. Like if there's something that doesn't sit right with you, if it's a personality thing or whatever, like just this is going to be a long-term commitment, a long-term relationship, and ultimately you should be happy with your decision. So like it's not something where you're like, oh, well, I like these 3 things about him, but then there's these 5 things about this person that I just can't stand. Like that's just not sustainable over the long haul. And then you add kids into the mix and it's just like, it's a recipe for disaster. So.
Yeah, absolutely. As full disclosure, our child just he opened the door and just went by on one of our roller suitcases, and he's not making too much noise now. So we're letting it go. But I just want to say like,
and he's clearly your kid, and that's what we're
I kind of wish I had like a back, one of those behind the scene view things. This is those moments where we try really hard and we're coaching him, and he, I would say 9 times out of 10 is fine, but then the moment he just can't hold it together, it's fairly.
He's 7. It's okay, and it's still COVID time. It's totally understandable. No worries.
We figured today would be good because he had hockey day, so I'm like, he'll be tired, and I'm like, so. At
one point, he actually had like a big poster that was rolled up, and he rolled across like he was jousting on a horse. So that's what we got outside of our door.
I would definitely say on that, you have to have a sense of humor. Look, and I know that's another cliche of like someone who can make you laugh, but someone who can make you not take yourself so seriously, because I think we all kind of do that. Mm-hmm. The other thing to that is kind of the other side of if you're dating for someone or you're looking, you can't meet the right person if you're with the wrong one. And I know that's a really hard thing, but you're like, there's this phrase my girlfriends and I used to have where it's like, if he's a frog at the wedding altar, and if he's a frog when you kiss him, he'll be a frog when you're done. That whole Prince Charming thing it's not going to work. So try not to, it's so hard not to, but like, oh, I can change him or work in progress. Like you have to be really honest and self-aware about what it is really a deal breaker and what is not. I mean, Scott was a really good sport knowing that he was marrying into a very religious Catholic family with a Jewish dad. So, I mean, that all was like already comedy. And then I had warned him my grandmother would be hard. I didn't realize that until we got married. So it was a year that your full name was Scott. I don't approve of how you live with my granddaughter. Like, swear she never, like, one breath. It was impressive.
The Catholic guilt was strong with that.
Yeah, it was. But like the fact that like you can accept, like that was not a deal breaker for us. Like for some people that would be a horrible deal breaker. So it is figuring out what are your deal breakers from the same perspective, like how close he is with his brothers. We do a lot of things with them. You have to accept that it's going to be a merging of both families, not just I'm going to envelop you into my own. So thinking through all of those things and making sure that also you can have your own independent passion. It makes you I think it makes you a good wife and makes you a great mom. Like I did not give up riding. I have friends who have had to because it's an expensive sport. But like once they had kids, like they've tried to do it and it's too difficult to try to get the balance. He gives me the space so that I can go do that and be able to ride so that then I've got this little thing of me that I'm not always Scott's wife or Will's mom. And I get to continue to do that. And it's always funny because when we're at competitions, which I've been doing since I was 8, they forget that my last name's Westwater sometimes. And so like Scott's like, you have this whole other personality of like where you're almost, you're Susan's husband for like a weekend, which is kind of entertaining.
I love it. I love how, like I said, I've met you both in person many times and the support you both have for one another, how you do complement each other in just who you are as people and your skill set. I mean, it's really beautiful to see. If people want to, you do have a business, but if people want to interact with you or they want to follow you on social media or learn about what you do, where is the best place they can do that? Well,
I was going to say Twitter if it's up.
Yeah, it's been down. If you're with us live, it's been down. So this did not post up on Twitter, but we'll put an episode up there later.
No worries. At SJW75, or you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can even email me at susan@pragmatic.digital. I'm always happy to make new friends, talk to people. I can be kind of extroverty, so.
Yeah, and I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn pretty regularly as well. So just look for Scott with 1 T, Westwater last name, and you should be able to find me.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you both for sharing your story. And I love how the two of you, like you said, bring in some humor. You complement one another. So thank you so much for just sharing it with us today.
Absolutely.
Sure. Thank you.